If you believe that competition is the ultimate engine of capitalism, that, you know, fighting tooth and nail for market share, battling your rivals every single day for every last inch of territory is how you win, well, you have already lost the game.
Yeah, it is a cold, almost brutal reality to face.
Mm.
Because in the highest tiers of business, of innovation, and global affairs, competition is not a sign of a healthy market. It is, it's actually a sign of failure.
Right.
It's a mathematical trap. I mean, it destroys capital, it burns out founders, and ultimately, it just leaves society with nothing more than incremental, commoditized changes.
I want to look at a massive, completely undeniable contradiction that proves this point right out of the gate. Think about the United States domestic airline industry. Let's rewind a bit to the year 2012, which is a perfect snapshot of this economic reality.
Oh, that's a great example.
Yeah, so that year, the U.S. airline industry generated a staggering $195 billion in revenue. Now, think about the physical reality of air travel. It is fundamentally essential to the modern world. I mean, if air travel vanished tomorrow, the global economy would immediately collapse.
Absolutely. Supply chains would freeze.
Exactly. International diplomacy halts. The value created by physically moving millions of people across continents at, hundreds of miles an hour is almost immeasurable.
And yet, despite that $195 billion flowing through the system, the airlines themselves made almost zero profit.
Which is insane.
It is. But think about the mechanics of what it takes to actually run an airline.
Yeah.
You have these massive fixed costs, buying Boeing and Airbus jets for hundreds of millions of dollars. You have highly volatile variable costs like jet fuel, which fluctuate based on global geopolitics.
Right. Things completely out of your control.
Exactly. You have highly unionized labor forces. And most importantly, you have ruthless, perfect competition. If one airline drops a ticket from New York to London by, say, $20, the others have to match it immediately or they lose the customer.
Because the seat on a plane is just a pure commodity at that point.
Exactly. You just want to get from point A to point B. They are trapped in this race to the bottom. I mean, they routinely go bankrupt, they wipe out their shareholders, they get recapitalized by the courts, and the brutal cycle just repeats itself over and over.
No. Contrast that massive, physical, utterly essential industry with Google specifically. Its search business in that exact same year, 2012, Google generated just over $50 billion in revenue. That is, roughly 1/4 of what the airlines pulled in?
Right.
And let's be intellectually honest here. As incredibly useful as a search engine is, if Google went down for a week, we would be annoyed. But we wouldn't see the physical halting of human civilization the way we would if aviation just disappeared. Search is arguably less vital to physical human survival.
Well, without a doubt. But look at the financial reality of that year. Google's market capitalization, the actual wealth captured and held by the company, was vastly larger than the entire United States airline industry combined.
Wow. All of them.
All of them put together. Google wasn't fighting a daily war of attrition over $20 price drops. They were sitting on a mountain of cash. Why? Because the airlines are trapped in perfect competition, and Google had engineered a monopoly.
And that tension right there, the airline versus the algorithm, is exactly what we are unpacking today. Welcome to our deep dive. You, the listener, inherently curious and looking to understand the real gears turning behind the global economy, well, you are in the right place.
Today's mission is laser-focused on a single globally significant thesis derived from Peter Thiel's Lecture 5, which is aptly titled, Competition is for Losers.
Right, and we are going to treat this not as some simple, business seminar, but really as a masterclass in global affairs, macroeconomics, and, honestly, the darkest, most predictable corners of human psychology.
Because when you strip away the corporate jargon, the PR spin, and all those comforting lies society tells itself about fairness and free markets, you are left with a really raw, mechanical truth about how empires are actually built.
Yeah.
You start to understand why so many undeniably brilliant people die poor while trying to build those empires.
Our journey today is going to dismantle practically everything traditional economics teaches us about value. We're going to dissect the fundamental mathematical formula of value creation versus value capture.
Which is crucial.
It is. We are also going to expose the multi-billion-dollar lies that massive companies tell regulators and you every single day. We'll break down the true mechanical anatomy of an empire, examining how to construct a fortress that competitors just cannot breach.
And finally, we will look at the deep historical and psychological traps that keep the rest of the world fiercely fighting over scraps.
So let's start with the math.
Right. So the foundation of this entire analytical framework rests on a brutally simple mathematical concept. We can call it the X and Y value formula. It dictates that to create a truly valuable entity, whether that's a company, your career, or even a nation state, two distinct things must be true.
Okay, what are they?
First, you must create X dollars of value for the world. You have to build something that actually solves a problem or advances human capability. Second, and this is the really crucial part, you must capture Y% of X.
Okay, let's unpack this, because here's where the illusion completely breaks down for most people. Human beings naturally assume that X and Y are intrinsically linked, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, we are taught from a young age that if you work hard and create a massive amount of value for the world, a massive X, you will automatically be rewarded with a massive piece of the pie, a massive Y. If you bake the biggest cake, you get the biggest slice.
But the reality exposed here is that X and Y are completely independent variables. They are entirely disconnected in the real world. You can create immense, civilization-altering value, a huge X, and capture absolutely 0% of it, a tiny Y.
Right.
The size of the value you create has almost no bearing on the percentage of that wealth you actually get to keep.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to our open, the airlines create a massive X, but their Y is essentially 0. Google creates a smaller X, but their Y is astronomical.
Wait, let me push back on this right away. Because if you walk into any university in the world and sit through an Econ 101 class, the professor at the chalkboard is going to tell you that perfect competition is the ideal state of a market.
Sure. Yeah.
We're taught about Adam Smith, the invisible hand, and how fierce competition drives prices down for consumers while forcing companies to become as efficient as humanly possible. Isn't that what society wants? Isn't perfect competition the ultimate goal of capitalism?
Well, it is the ultimate goal for the consumer. Absolutely. And it's a beautiful, elegant model for the economics professor because perfect competition is incredibly easy to model mathematically on a chalkboard.
Right. The equations just balance out perfectly.
Exactly. It works perfectly in a static theoretical world.
Mm.
In a perfectly competitive market, all of the value created, all of the quote-unquote consumer surplus is captured by the public. But we have to shift our perspective here. If we look at this through the lens of the creator, the business owner, the worker, or the innovator, perfect competition is a relentless nightmare.
Because it turns everything into a commodity.
Exactly. When you are in perfect competition, your product is completely indistinguishable from your rival's product. The only lever you have left to pull is price. So you lower your price, and then they lower theirs.
And it just spirals.
You fight so incredibly hard just to maintain your baseline survival that your profit margins inevitably drop to 0. All the capital, all the wealth you could have used to innovate further or reward your employees is completely computed away. In the game of perfect competition, the business loses every single time.
I think about how this applies not just to massive corporations, but to an individual listening to this right now. Think about your own career. If your skill set is perfectly competitive, if there are 10,000 other people in your city who can do exactly what you do with the exact same level of proficiency, you have 0 leverage.
None at all.
You might be creating great value for your employer, a huge X, but your Y, your salary, will be driven down to the absolute minimum required to keep you from quitting because you are a commodity.
That is a perfect translation of the macro concept to the micro level. Leverage only exists when competition is absent, which brings us to a very extreme, almost binary view of the global economy.
Right, that there are really only 2 kinds of businesses in the world.
Precisely 2. On one side, you have businesses that are perfectly competitive. They are locked in a daily struggle for survival, their margins are 0, and their capital is constantly bleeding out.
And on the other side.
On the other side, you have businesses that are monopolies. They own their market, they dictate pricing, they accumulate massive capital, and they actually have the breathing room to plan for the future.
Mm.
And what is terrifying is how shockingly little middle ground there actually is. You are usually trending heavily toward one pole or the other.
Which naturally leads to a massive escalation in our analysis here. If this binary is true, if the world is divided neatly into struggling competitors and dominant monopolies, why doesn't it look that way when we, read the Financial Times or watch the news or listen to CEOs speak?
Right.
It doesn't feel like a binary world. It feels like a complex spectrum.
Well, it feels that way because everyone is lying.
I love the absolute ruthlessness of that statement. Everyone is lying. Let's break down the mechanics of these lies, because the players involved have massive financial, legal, and existential incentives to obscure the reality of their business models.
They do.
Let's look at the monopolist's lie first. Why would a company that has achieved the ultimate goal total market dominance spend billions of dollars pretending they haven't?
The primary reason is self-preservation. Specifically, avoiding the crosshairs of government regulation and antitrust scrutiny. In the modern regulatory state, the worst possible thing you can do is stand up and declare, "I am a monopoly."
Right, that's just begging for a subpoena.
The moment you do that, government agencies swarm. They investigate your pricing, they restrict your acquisitions, and they might even attempt to break your company apart. So monopolists are heavily incentivized to hide their dominance. And the mechanical way they do this is fascinating. They describe their market as a massive, sweeping union of wildly different industries.
They draw a Venn diagram where they are just a tiny, insignificant dot in the center of a massive circle.
Exactly. They artificially inflate the size of the pond they're swimming in to make themselves look like a totally harmless little fish. Let's return to Google as the archetypal example here. In the realm of search, Google is a textbook monopoly. They control well over 66% of the market, and in many regions, it's closer to 90%.
Yeah.
But if you read Google's congressional testimony or listen to their executives speak to regulators, you will almost never hear them refer to themselves as a search engine.
Because owning 90% of the search engine market sounds illegal, so what do they call themselves instead?
They reframe their entire identity. They will say, "We are not a search engine, we are an advertising company." Now watch what happens to the math when they do that.
Okay.
The global advertising market encompassing television, print, billboards, radio, and digital is roughly a $500 billion industry. Suddenly, Google's $50 billion in revenue doesn't look like a monopoly. It looks like a mere 10% slice of a massive, highly competitive pie.
Oh, wow. So they can point to regulatory bodies and say, look at all this fierce competition we face from local television stations and billboard companies.
Exactly. It's a sleight of hand. And they go even further than that sometimes. Sometimes they don't even call themselves an advertising company. They just say, "We are a technology company."
Which is the ultimate union of markets. If you define your market as global consumer technology, I mean, that's a market worth trillions of dollars. Google's narrative completely shifts.
Right. Now they can claim they are besieged on all sides. They tell regulators, "We're fighting a brutal, multi-front war for our very survival. We are competing with Apple in mobile hardware. We are competing with Facebook in social networking. We are competing with Amazon in cloud infrastructure. We are even competing with auto manufacturers in the race for self-driving cars."
They weave this incredible narrative of vulnerability. By defining their market as the union of search, plus mobile, plus social, plus cloud, plus automotive, their actual functional monopoly in search is perfectly camouflaged. They get to keep printing money from search without the government shutting them down.
But that is only half the equation. We have to flip the lens and look at the other side of the binary. The non-monopolists lie.
Right, the businesses that are actually struggling.
Yeah, these are the failing, hyper-competitive businesses. They're bleeding capital, their margins are non-existent, and they are desperate for investment just to keep the lights on. Because they're in the exact opposite position of Google, they have to tell the exact opposite lie.
So if Google's lie is the union of markets to look small, the failing founder's lie is the intersection of markets to look unique.
Precisely. The non-monopolist pretends their market is uniquely, wonderfully small and uncontested. This is where founders string together a series of trendy buzzwords to create a fictional space where they are the only player.
Oh, I've seen this a million times.
They will walk into a venture capital firm and pitch themselves not as just another struggling software company, but as the first and only company at the intersection of peer-to-peer sharing, mobile-first networking, social geolocation, and ephemeral apps.
I want to introduce an analogy here that I think perfectly captures the absurdity of this. It's the concept of the Stanford of North Dakota.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to put it.
Right. If you are a university in North Dakota and you want to sound elite and uncontested, you don't compare yourself to Harvard or Oxford. You define your parameters so incredibly narrowly that you are technically one of a kind. You claim, we are the premier, top-tier, research-driven institution located in the upper Midwest region.
You draw the boundary lines so tight that you are the only thing inside them.
Exactly. But the harsh reality is that the something of somewhere is usually just the nothing of nowhere.
The restaurant industry is perhaps the most visceral, everyday example of this trap. I mean, the global restaurant industry is a multi-trillion-dollar market. On paper, to a naive observer, it looks like a gold rush.
Yeah.
But it is fundamentally terrible to enter because it is perfectly competitive. Your margins are relentlessly squeezed by food costs and labor, your product is highly perishable, and your risk of failure within the first 2 years is astronomically high.
Yet thousands of people open restaurants every single year. How do they justify it to the bank?
By using the intersection lie, a restaurateur will go to the bank for a loan and they won't say, I am opening a restaurant in a city that already has 5,000 restaurants. They will say, I am opening the only farm-to-table, British fusion, fast casual dining experience in downtown Palo Alto.
They define their specific concept by the intersection of location, cuisine, and ambiance to create the illusion of a monopoly.
Yes, but just because you are the only British fusion restaurant in Palo Alto doesn't mean anyone actually wants to eat there. You haven't escaped competition. You've just defined your way into an empty room.
Let's scale this up from a single restaurant to a macroeconomic disaster. Because how does this misunderstanding of market size, this fatal attraction to massive competitive markets, lead to catastrophic global failures? It isn't just naive chefs making this mistake. Some of the smartest investors on the planet fall for it.
Oh, absolutely. We can look directly at the clean tech bubble in Silicon Valley that occurred roughly between 2005 and 2008. This period represents a massive historic destruction of capital, and it was driven almost entirely by the fallacy of massive markets.
What happened exactly?
During that era, thousands of clean tech startups were founded. And if you looked at their pitch decks, almost every single one of them started with the exact same slide. They declared, with massive enthusiasm, that they were entering a $1 trillion global energy market.
And if I'm an investor, my eyes light up. $1 trillion. If we just capture 1%, we are billionaires.
But that is the fatal trap. That tension is profound. Being a minnow in a vast ocean is the worst possible place you can find yourself in business. Think about the mechanics of entering the $1 trillion energy market with a new solar panel company.
Okay.
You are stepping onto a battlefield with thousands of competitors, most of whom you don't even know exist. You are competing against heavily subsidized, state-backed enterprises in China. You are competing against entrenched natural gas and coal plants. You're competing against nuclear power.
And the worst part is, the buyer doesn't care about your brand at all. Energy is the ultimate commodity. I mean, when I turn on the light switch in my house, I do not know or care if that electron was generated by a wind turbine, a lump of coal, or your fancy new thin-film solar panel. The only metric that matters to me is price per kilowatt hour.
Exactly. You are a commodity from day one. You have zero pricing power. You are trapped in perfect competition on a global scale. The lesson from the clean tech graveyard is really ruthless. You do not want to be the 100th company entering a $1 trillion market. You want to be the absolute only fish in a tiny, seemingly insignificant pond.
Which brings us to a major pivot in our deep dive today. We have deconstructed the problem. We know that massive markets are a death sentence, and perfect competition is a trap that basically bleeds you dry. So how does one actually build an empire from scratch? Let's move from the lies and failures into deep analysis, the mechanical execution of building a monopoly. If I'm starting out, where do I look?
Well, the blueprint for building a monopoly is deeply counterintuitive to how most people think about ambition. You do not start by trying to conquer the world. You start by finding a market so incredibly small, so hyper-specific, that outsiders look at it and think it has absolutely zero financial value.
Really, zero value.
Yes. You find a tiny pond, you dominate it completely until you have absolute monopoly pricing power, and only then do you expand outward in concentric circles.
The historical track record for this strategy is profound, and it hides right in plain sight. Let's look at Amazon. Today, we know Amazon as the everything store, right? A massive logistical leviathan that touches almost every sector of the global economy.
Yeah.
But in the mid-1990s, Jeff Bezos didn't launch the everything store. He launched a bookstore. He picked a very specific, highly manageable market physical books where he could catalog every single item in existence, which is something a physical brick-and-mortar store could never do. He dominated the tiny pond of online book sales before he ever even thought about selling electronics or clothing or cloud computing.
Right, and eBay is another perfect illustration of this mechanic. When Pierre Omidyar started eBay, he didn't try to build a global marketplace for cars, industrial equipment, and real estate. The very first iteration of eBay gained traction by catering to an incredibly niche community, people who collected Pez dispensers.
Wait, Pez dispensers, the little handy things.
Yes, Pez dispensers. And then they moved to Beanie Babies. These were micro markets that traditional auction houses like Sotheby's or Christie's would have found utterly laughable. They would have ignored them completely. But By dominating those tiny obsessive communities, eBay built the infrastructure and the user trust required to eventually option everything else in the world.
And then there is Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg didn't launch a global social network. He launched a directory for 10,000 students at Harvard University. Think about how small that is. They captured a 60% market share of Harvard students in a matter of days.
It's incredible.
At the time, if you showed that business model to a traditional Wall Street analyst, they would have laughed you right out of the room. They would have said, your total addressable market is a few thousand college students. This has zero financial value.
But the Wall Street analysts fundamentally misunderstood the mechanics of monopoly building. Because Facebook achieved total dominance in that micro market, they created an ironclad network effect. They then took that exact same model and expanded concentrically, first to other Ivy League schools, then to all universities, then to high schools, and finally the entire globe.
And we have to mention PayPal here, seeing as it's the company Peter Thiel himself co-founded. Who was their initial target market? Because it wasn't the global banking system.
No, not at all. PayPal's initial stronghold was roughly 20,000 eBay power sellers. These were people making a living by selling items constantly on the eBay platform. Now, the reaction from traditional banking observers was completely predictable. They looked at this demographic and said, this is a terrible market. These are people selling junk out of their garages on the internet. Why would you want to build a financial product for them?
But PayPal realized something vital, didn't they? For those 20,000 people, the existing financial system was agonizingly slow and painful. I mean, the alternative to PayPal was an eBay seller waiting for a buyer to physically mail them a paper check, waiting for it to arrive, taking it to the bank, and waiting another week for the check to clear before they could even ship the item. It was a friction-filled nightmare.
Exactly. So PayPal built a product that allowed money to be transferred via email almost instantly. They achieved massive market penetration within that tiny group of 20,000 people almost overnight. They became a true monopoly in the eBay power seller ecosystem.
And from that impregnable stronghold, they built a brand and expanded to become a global payment processor.
Yes.
So the strategy's clear: find your tiny pond and dominate it. But let's get into the actual gears of the machine here. What are the specific mechanics of a company that achieves this? How do you build a moat so deep that no competitor can ever cross it? The framework outlines 4 specific mechanical characteristics of a monopoly. Let's break them down, starting with the foundation.
The first and arguably most critical characteristic is proprietary technology. But we must be very specific about what that means. There is an arbitrary but absolutely vital rule of thumb in venture capital. Your technology must be an order of magnitude, meaning exactly 10 times better than the next best alternative.
Why 10 times? I mean, why isn't a 20% improvement good enough?
Because human beings are inherently lazy, and switching costs, both financial and psychological, are very, very high. If you build a software tool that is 20% more efficient than what a company is currently using, the CEO is not going to retrain their entire workforce to use it.
Right, it's just not worth the headache.
Exactly. A marginal improvement is easily ignored by the consumer, or it's easily copied by an incumbent who already has distribution. It has to be a 10x improvement to generate enough gravitational pull to break through the noise and fundamentally change user behavior.
We see this with the PayPal example we just discussed. Moving money in seconds versus waiting 10 days for a check to clear. That isn't a 20% improvement. That is a massive order of magnitude leap in speed. Or take the introduction of the original iPhone. Before the iPhone, we had BlackBerries. They could send email, but the mobile web browsing experience was just horrific. The iPhone didn't just marginally improve the BlackBerry keyboard. It eliminated the keyboard entirely, introduced multi-touch, and gave you the actual internet right in your pocket. It was a 10x improvement in user experience, which is exactly why it destroyed the incumbents.
But having a 10x technology is only the first layer of the fortress, because eventually someone might reverse engineer your technology. To truly cement a monopoly, you need the second characteristic: network effects.
Now, network effects are fascinating because they are basically magic once they are up and running, but they are an absolute nightmare to start. Explain the mechanics of a network effect.
So a network effect occurs when a product or service becomes inherently more valuable to every existing user with each new user that joins. Telephones are the classic example of this. A telephone is completely useless if you are the only person on Earth who owns one.
Right. Who are you going to call?
Exactly. It becomes marginally useful when your friend gets one, and it becomes an indispensable tool of modern life when everyone has one.
But that highlights the core paradox. how do you get the first user to adopt the product when the network is empty and therefore has absolutely no value to them?
This is known as the cold start problem. The paradox dictates that for a network effect business to succeed, the product must somehow be uniquely valuable to the very first user, even when the network is tiny. If the product only functions when 1 million people are on it, you will never convince the first 10 people to stick around.
Which is why Facebook starting at Harvard was so brilliant. A directory of just Harvard students was immediately valuable to a Harvard student on day one,
Yeah.
even without the rest of the world on it.
Right.
But I want to bring up an anecdote about PayPal here that I think perfectly illustrates how aggressively you have to brute force a network effect into existence. PayPal didn't just wait for people to realize their tech was 10x better. They actually paid people to use it.
Yes, it is one of the most famous growth hacks in Silicon Valley history. To overcome that cold start problem, PayPal literally offered new users $10 just to sign up, and another $10 for every friend they referred.
Wait, they basically handed out cash?
They essentially bought their initial network density. They burned through millions of dollars in venture capital to do it, but they understood the mathematical endgame. Once the network reached critical mass, the cost of acquiring those users would be totally dwarfed by the monopolistic value of the network itself. They seeded the network with cash until the gravity of the network took over.
Okay, so you have 10x tech, and you've ignited a network effect. What is the third characteristic of the monopoly fortress?
The third characteristic is economies of scale. In traditional physical businesses, what we might call the world of atoms, scaling up is incredibly expensive. If you run a yoga studio and your classes are full, to double your revenue, you have to lease a second building, hire twice as many instructors, and double your insurance. Your costs scale almost linearly with your revenue.
But software, the world of bits, completely breaks that physical law.
Exactly. Software businesses possess massive fixed costs, but practically zero marginal costs. It might cost a company $50 million in engineering salaries and server architecture to write the code for a new software application. But once version 1.0 is compiled, the cost to distribute the second copy, the 1,000th copy, or the billionth copy across the internet is essentially zero.
It literally costs nothing to send an email with a download link.
Precisely. This means a software company can scale infinitely to serve the entire globe without their expenses scaling proportionally. As they grow, their profit margins inherently widen. This dynamic naturally trends toward a monopoly structure because the largest player has an insurmountable mathematical advantage over a smaller rival.
And the fourth and final characteristic mentioned in the framework is branding. Now, branding is clearly powerful. We all know what Apple represents or what Coca-Cola represents. It's the ability to lodge an idea so firmly in the public consciousness that you become synonymous with an entire category. But the analysis here offers a stark warning about branding, doesn't it?
It does. The warning is that while branding is a powerful amplifier, it is incredibly fragile if it is not supported by the first three pillars: proprietary tech, network effects, and scale. You cannot build a durable monopoly on branding alone.
Do we have an example of that?
Look at a company like Yahoo in the early 2000s. They had massive brand recognition, incredible cultural cachet. But underneath the brand, their underlying search technology was vastly inferior to Google's. All the branding in the world couldn't save them once the consumer realized the competitor had a 10x better product. Brand is the roof of the fortress, but tech and scale are the foundation.
This mechanical breakdown leads us to a crucial strategic shift in how we view these companies over the dimension of time. And this is where I really want to push back, because what we are about to discuss contradicts a deeply held belief in business culture. Everyone, from venture capitalists to business school professors, preaches the gospel of the first mover advantage. The idea that whoever gets to the market first plants their flag and claims the territory is destined to win. But this analysis systematically dismantles that idea.
The first mover advantage is a myth, or at best, it's a tactical misunderstanding. Being the first to market is not the goal. Being first just means you are the one hacking through the jungle, taking all the arrows and making all the expensive mistakes that the second or third player can learn from.
Right.
The actual goal is to be the last mover in a category.
You want to be the company that makes the final definitive breakthrough that shuts the door on the category forever.
Exactly. Look at history. Microsoft was absolutely not the first company to build a computer operating system, but they built the definitive one that achieved massive scale. positioning themselves to be the last dominant operating system for decades. Google was not the first search engine. There were dozens of search engines before them: AltaVista, Ask Jeeves, Lycos. But Google engineered the final 10x breakthrough in PageRank technology. They were the last search engine.
To really cement why being the last mover is where the actual wealth is generated, we have to look at the financial math. The text brings in a concept called discounted cash flow, or DCF analysis. Now, explain this to me as if I'm a smart person who just hasn't spent years working on Wall Street. What actually is a discounted cash flow, and how does it prove the last mover theory?
At its core, a discounted cash flow analysis is a mathematical formula used by investors to determine what a company is worth today, based on all the cash it is expected to generate in the future. Money today is worth more than money tomorrow, so future cash flows are discounted backward to reach a present value.
Okay, that makes sense. A dollar today is worth more than a dollar next year. But how does this apply to a startup?
Let's look at the historical data provided in the analysis regarding PayPal. In March of 2001, an incredibly thorough DCF analysis was conducted on PayPal. At that specific moment, the company was in a hyper-growth phase. They were growing their user base and revenue at roughly 100% a year.
Which is phenomenal.
Right. Now, if you looked at that through a short-term lens, you would think all the value of the company was in that explosive immediate growth.
Right, the hockey stick chart that everyone loves.
But the DCF math revealed a stunning reality. The mathematical model projected that roughly 75% of PayPal's total present value, the actual worth of the company, was going to come from cash flows generated in the year 2011 and beyond, meaning 3/4 of the company's value was locked in a future that was a full decade away.
Let that sink in. Everyone is obsessing over what the company's doing this month or this quarter, but the actual wealth doesn't materialize unless the company survives for 10 years and continues to dominate.
That is the profound realization. Society, the media, and even seasoned venture capitalists drastically overvalue short-term growth rates. We are obsessed with week-over-week user acquisition because it is a metric that is incredibly easy to measure right now. But we totally undervalue long-term durability.
Growth is a sprint. Durability is asking, will you still be a monopoly in 15 years?
And durability is qualitative. It is much harder to measure on a spreadsheet, but it is where all the actual financial value lives. If you grow at 200% a year for 3 years and then a competitor wipes you out because you have no defensive moat, the present value of your company drops to zero. You must be the last mover to capture those decade-out cash flows.
To ground this in a brilliant non-business analogy, I want to use the reference from the source material regarding the legendary chess grandmaster, José Raúl Capablanca. What was his philosophy on winning?
Capablanca famously stated that to succeed in chess, you must not obsess over the opening. You must begin by studying the end game. Novices memorize flashy opening moves to win quick advantages. Grandmasters understand exactly what the board needs to look like when the game is over, where the kings and pawns must be positioned, and they work backward from that final state to dictate their current moves.
You don't build a monopoly by just having a cool launch party. You build it by understanding exactly what your impregnable fortress needs to look like in 10 years and engineering every decision today to reach that specific end state. You must study the end game.
Which transitions us perfectly into the final, most expansive phase of our deep dive. We need to zoom out.
Let's do it.
We are going to move from the specific mathematics of a Silicon Valley startup to the grand 250-year sweep of human innovation. Because when you take everything we've just discussed, the X and Y formula, the brutality of perfect competition, the mechanics of value capture, and you apply it to the history of science and technology, a very dark, very sobering pattern emerges.
It forces us to ask a heartbreaking question. Why do so many undeniably brilliant minds, people who literally alter the course of human history, die poor?
It is a phenomenon we can categorize as the tragedy of the scientist. If we return to the X and Y formula, creating value versus capturing value, the historical record is remarkably consistent. For the last 250 years, the smartest people on the planet have created massive, unimaginable value for society, a gargantuan X. But historically, they have captured absolutely 0% of it. Their Y equals 0.
Let's walk through the historical examples because they are profound. Think about the physicists of the early 20th century. The men and women who discovered relativity, who cracked quantum mechanics, who literally unlocked the foundational secrets of the universe.
Right.
They fundamentally altered the trajectory of human civilization, but they did not become billionaires. The wealth generated by their discoveries was captured by downstream industries over the next century.
Or Look at the Wright brothers. They achieved human flight. It is an achievement of unparalleled engineering magnitude. But they did not capture the massive financial upside of the global aviation industry. They spent years mired in patent lawsuits, fighting fierce competition, while the actual wealth of aviation was eventually captured by entirely different entities decades later.
Even if we look at the massive infrastructure booms of the 19th century,
Yeah.
the pioneers who built the vast railroad networks across the United States, they laid down the physical arteries of the modern economy. They created massive value.
But almost all of the original railroad companies went bankrupt.
Exactly. Due to ferocious, cutthroat competition on shipping rates, they destroyed each other, leaving the physical tracks behind for society to use for free.
We don't even have to go back that far. Let's look at the tech sector itself. Consider the disk drive manufacturing boom of the 1980s. This is a perfect modern illustration of the tragedy.
Break down the mechanics of that 1980s disk drive bloodbath, because people think tech is always lucrative.
In the 1980s, manufacturing hard disk drives was the cutting edge of technology. The engineering required to shrink a magnetic disk from 8 inches down to 5.25, down to 3.5, while exponentially increasing storage capacity was staggering.
It was pure innovation.
Exactly. These companies were incredibly innovative. They were pushing the boundaries of physics, improving efficiency in storage by 5 to 7% every single year.
But what happened to the financial value of that innovation?
It completely evaporated because the disk drive market was perfectly competitive. There were dozens of companies in a relentless arms race. If Company A invented a denser drive, Company B had to match it within months or go bankrupt. Because the competition was so fierce, they could not maintain pricing power.
So who got the money?
As a result, all of the massive financial value of those technological innovations was passed directly to the consumer, to you and me, in the form of cheaper, better computers. The founders, the engineers, and the investors in those disk drive companies mostly went bankrupt. They created billions in value and captured none of it.
So how does society culturally deal with this blatant unfairness? When we see brilliant scientists and engineers getting entirely screwed by the economic system, what do we say to ourselves to make it okay?
We create a cultural rationalization.
Right. We tell ourselves, well, scientists don't really care about money anyway. True innovation is done purely for the love of discovery. They are above the concept of wealth.
It's a comforting, romantic lie that society tells itself to obscure a much darker structural truth. The truth is not that scientists inherently despise wealth or don't want to provide for their families. The truth is that the microeconomic structure of scientific research and hardware manufacturing inherently guarantees that all financial value is competed away.
Because they're stuck in a system that forces Y to be zero.
Exactly. They are operating in a system, often funded by grants or trapped in perfect competition, where Y is structurally forced to be zero. We romanticize their poverty so we don't have to fix the system.
If that's the historical reality, if the sheer act of invention doesn't guarantee wealth, where has the actual value capture historically lived? If not with the genius inventors in their labs, then who actually gets to keep the money?
The exceptions to the tragedy of the scientist historically lie in the hands of those who build complex, vertically integrated monopolies. These are individuals and organizations that do not just invent one discrete widget. They construct massive, inescapable systems. Look back at the titans of the Second Industrial Revolution. Look at John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil.
Rockefeller didn't just drill for oil.
Exactly. He realized that drilling for oil was a commodity business subject to wild price swings and fierce competition. So he vertically integrated the entire process. He built the refineries. He bought the pipelines. He bought the train cars that transported the oil. He even bought the forests that provided the wood to build the barrels.
Wow, so he owned everything.
By integrating the entire supply chain, he removed all dependency on third-party suppliers and locked out all potential competitors. He didn't just invent a product, he owned the ecosystem. Henry Ford did the exact same thing with the River Rouge complex, bringing raw iron ore in one end and driving finished Model Ts out the other.
And we see that exact same vertical integration playbook being executed today at the absolute highest levels of industry. Look at Elon Musk with Tesla and SpaceX.
Musk's success is a direct modern application of this principle. Tesla didn't succeed because of one single isolated 10x battery breakthrough that they patented and tried to license. They succeeded because they integrated highly complex pieces of a massive puzzle.
Right. They built their own global charging network so they wouldn't have to rely on third-party infrastructure.
Exactly. They bypassed traditional dealership networks to sell directly to consumers. They brought software development entirely in-house, SpaceX is the same. They internalize massive amounts of manufacturing rather than relying on a fragmented web of aerospace subcontractors. They build a vertically integrated machine that is incredibly difficult and incredibly expensive for a traditional car company or aerospace firm to replicate.
And while vertical integration works in the physical world of atoms, we also have to reiterate the unique, terrifying power of software in this historical context.
We do, because software, the world of bits, allows for a speed of monopoly creation that is entirely unprecedented in human history. To build Standard Oil took decades of physical labor, political maneuvering, and massive capital expenditure. A software company, utilizing the zero marginal cost of distribution, can achieve massive global scale and conquer an entirely new market before traditional physical competitors even realize that a new market has been created.
Software can bypass the physical friction of history. Okay, let me bring us to the ultimate final question of this deep dive. We have laid everything out on the table. We have explained the math of the X and Y formula. We have shown that history dictates perfect competition is a relentless path to bankruptcy. We have proved that massive markets are a trap.
Right.
If all of this is true, and logically it seems airtight, why do the smartest, most highly educated people in the world keep rushing blindly into hyper-competitive bloodbaths? Why do MBA graduates keep trying to open generic restaurants or start another indistinguishable social media app or rush headlong into a commodity clean tech market?
To answer that, we have to move beyond economics and mathematics and delve into the deepest, darkest insight of the entire analysis. The flaw is not a spreadsheet error. It is a fundamental biological flaw in human nature itself. Human beings are inherently deeply mimetic.
Mimetic. Let's define that carefully. It means we learn and operate through imitation.
Precisely. The text points out a fascinating, almost unsettling linguistic detail. The word ape functions as both a noun describing a primate and a verb meaning to imitate or copy. We are, at our core, a herd-like species. Our evolutionary survival relied on looking around at what the rest of the tribe was doing and copying them.
Right. If everyone is running away from something, you run too.
Exactly. We do not naturally form independent contrarian desires. We look at what the people around us value, and we decide that we must value it too.
The examples used to illustrate this mimetic trap are devastatingly accurate. Think about Los Angeles. Every single year, roughly 20,000 people pack up their entire lives, move to Hollywood, and try to become movie stars. They know perfectly well that the mathematical odds of achieving massive success in acting are essentially zero. It's a hyper-competitive, structurally brutal industry.
So why do they do it?
Because they see other people wanting to be famous, and that shared desire validates their own ambition.
Or look at an environment populated by supposedly the most rational, analytical minds on the planet, academia. The text references Henry Kissinger's famous, cynical observation about his time as a faculty member at Harvard University. Kissinger noted that the political battles and personal feuds between academics were so incredibly ferocious and bitter, precisely because the actual stakes of those battles were so remarkably small.
They are fighting literal wars in faculty meetings over office space or minor prestige, while the broader world moves on without them.
Because they are trapped in a mimetic bubble. When a dozen brilliant professors are all fiercely competing for the same tiny, insignificant prize, they convince each other through their shared obsession that the prize is actually the most important thing in the world.
And that is the terrifying realization at the absolute heart of this entire deep dive. We are biologically hardwired to view a crowded market or a fierce competition as a form of safety and validation. When we see 1,000 other people trying to start a specific type of business or applying for a specific type of job, our primal instinct is to think, wow, if everyone is trying to do this, it must be incredibly valuable. I need to get in there and fight for my share.
But the reality, the cold mathematical reality we've explored today, dictates the exact opposite. A crowd is almost never proof of underlying value. A crowd is often simply proof of collective insanity. Competition is a psychological blind spot. It causes us to become hopelessly fixated on beating the person standing next to us.
We just want to win the game in front of us.
Exactly. We obsess over fighting for a tiny marginal advantage while completely losing sight of what is truly valuable in the broader world. We become so consumed with the mechanics of winning the competition that we completely forget to ask if the prize is even worth winning in the first place.
So let's synthesize this monumental journey we've been on. You, the listener, have just been handed the cipher. You have seen the hidden math of value creation. You understand how X and Y operate completely independently, leaving vital, life-saving industries bankrupt while invisible software giants hoard billions.
Right.
You have been exposed to the multi-billion-dollar lies of the tech giants, how monopolies strategically hide their power behind Venn diagrams, and how failing companies disguise their vulnerability with buzzwords. You now grasp the mechanical dominance of starting incredibly small, dominating a niche, and only then expanding outward.
And perhaps most sobering of all, you've seen the brutal reality that human history rarely rewards its most brilliant inventors if they do not understand the microeconomics of value capture.
The ultimate lesson here is not merely an economic strategy, it is a psychological imperative. To build something truly lasting, to capture actual value in your life or your business, you must actively, consciously reject the validation of the crowd. You have to fight your own deepest evolutionary instincts.
If the nature of software provides zero marginal cost to scale, and human nature is hardwired for blind imitation, then the ultimate barrier to building an empire isn't a lack of venture capital, and it isn't a lack of technological skill. It is overcoming your own biological programming.
So, as you look at your own career, your own business, or the investments you are making, I want to leave you with one final provocative question. Are you brave enough to stop fighting for space at the tiny, crowded door where everyone else is tearing each other apart for scraps? Are you willing to walk away from the validation of the herd and instead walk entirely alone through the vast, empty gate just around the corner?
That is the real test of a founder and the real test of an intellect, escaping the gravitational pull of competition.
Because if you truly believe that fighting tooth and nail for market share, battling your rivals every single day is how you win well, you have already lost the game. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narrative, look for the empty spaces, and we'll see you next time.